It's really wonderful to talk with all of you today. I was really looking forward to York hosting the AICO meeting to be able to learn from and with so many amazing people that are doing this fantastic work. And it's interesting because when we first had these discussions about hosting, there was a particular element of our working group that I wanted to share. And of course, because of the brand new situation that we're in, a lot of those things have changed. So now I can talk more about the concept of the HonesTEA as a way to demonstrate the importance of collaboration and reflection, especially during these times. Now, I will just say that it seems like my cats just woke up from a nap and like they are buzzing around my feet, so they might interrupt our meeting, but I mean, they're adorable, so don't worry about that. Now, this is called the HonesTEA. It's a pretty catchy name, if I do say so myself, slash I came up with it. I was trying to decide what I should use as my teacup today, and I was going to use the Room of One's Own mug that I have, or the Keep Calm, Carry On mug that we have, or my York University mug, which is actually a TTC mug. That's our wonderful subway station. But I thought instead I would bring out the high artillery of teacups, because why better to use your fancy teacups than when you are sitting by yourself in a room, staring at a screen, hoping that hundreds of people can hear you. So we'll go with that. I also just wanted to flag that I am using a Mad Tea Party blend tea today, because while we are in Mad Tea Party times, it is always an opportunity to have a little unbirthday celebration. So with that spirit in mind, I want to talk a little bit about the HonesTEA. So I work for the Office of the Vice Provost Academic, and I do a variety of different things as a program development and curriculum innovation specialist. I focus mainly on education strategies, curriculum development strategies, and it's a variety of different projects from across the university. The Vice Provost Academic was interested in thinking about and maybe even refreshing some of our ideas around academic honesty policy and practices. And I was brought in for one of the subgroups related to education to think about how we could educate our students more about issues of academic honesty and academic integrity. That work has been so fantastic. It is so wonderful to work with such a vibrant and creative working group. One of the first things that they had said was, you know, we don't really know each other. This is a very large university, and we want to develop these best practices, and we know other people are doing these things. How can we connect more? And so the first part of our education strategy, although it wasn't education for students, was to develop a community of practice. And we have a capstone cafe at York University. So we wanted to draw on that idea of a cafe. A community of practice can seem kind of intimidating. It can kind of seem like an intimidating thing where you have to, like, maybe people think you have to come and do work, but a cafe seems a little bit more casual. And so the idea of the HonesTEA came about as a way to think through and connect with people in a way that could provide opportunities for discussion and a connection, but in a way that might not seem intimidating. So we had a couple goals for our HonesTEA, and I'm going to go over to my screen right now. So we had a few goals for our HonesTEA. The first one was to meet and converse with others. Again, as a large university, there are people doing very similar work in different faculties. How can we better get these people together to meet and have conversations? The second is to develop a community of practice. And again, I was saying, like, we didn't want to use that as a name because we didn't want to throw people off, but that's essentially what an HonesTEA is. It's a community of practice. In that community of practice, we wanted to share best practices and discuss emergent trends. That's the key element of having us all together. But another key element that I think makes the concept of the HonesTEA even more powerful is this notion of reflection. Now remember, we came up with this idea of an HonesTEA as a way to help develop our education strategy. So this notion of reflection, and when I say reflection, I really mean develop a foundation for greater understanding, would allow us to better think about our education strategies in our separate working group meetings, with more depth to some of the conversations that we're talking about. Now, I come from kind of a diverse background. Academic honesty is not my field. Almost everyone here knows more about policies related to academic honesty than I do, which I should just say is why I feel so thankful to be able to speak with and in this community. But my background in education more generally, I talk to high school history teachers in particular about their strategies for teaching and learning history. And during that research, I spent time in a lot of staff rooms. And staff rooms, especially in schools, may not be the most constructive place for discussing issues. So in my research, and this might seem like a tangent, but just trust me, I will come back. It does come around. What I found in my research is that there's 3 different ways that professionals related to education can talk through their work in these shared spaces. And those are, I'm going to go back to my screen here. Bitching or complaining. Bitching is not my word. I never would use it, but a lot of teachers used it, so I wanted to demonstrate that. Or complaining. You might be familiar with this with colleagues you might think are a little toxic, and that it's just conversation for the sake of conversation about not thinking that anything can change and seeing other people as the problem. There's also, though, venting, which is very important. I don't want to suggest that we can't share the difficulties of our work. Venting is also very important, but there's a little bit more space for understanding the context of things that are happening, not just to where you can in complaining, just talk about everything that's negative for the sake of talking about things that are negative, but really sharing things that are happening as a way to kind of get it off your chest. And then the other part is reflection. And the reflection part of it is the most powerful, but it's not always what people have the ability to do in these spaces. Because reflection indicates a thoughtful analysis of what a situation was about, why a situation happened, and this is the key element of moving it from just venting, how it can be different in the future. And I'm not saying that every time that you are talking about something negative or thinking about something negative, it always has to lead to a constructive, positive solution. But rather, this notion of reflection allows us to think more just about hope and action and draws on the notion of greater learning. This is a goal. It's not necessarily what can happen, because I know I've been in situations too where you're so reactive. There isn't space for that. And I also just want to be very clear. I know that you all aren't educators in the same way that these teachers were. But what I found when I looked at those differences between the different ways we can talk through things is that the reflection helps develop more work in the future that can allow change. And I think that this is especially important when we are talking about academic honesty and academic integrity, because we want students to engage in academically honest practices, that we want them to be have academic integrity. So in coming together as a community of practice, we do need to not just say, and I just want to be very clear, this has never actually been an issue when we've had these conversations. We don't just want to say like it's those students are the problem. We want to have a better understanding of the underlying issues in order for us to address them more effectively. And this is the key for me of what the academic HonesTEA is able to do. I want to just draw on a little bit of learning theory to emphasize that point a little bit more. So in a lot of the work I do, I talk a lot about meaningful learning. That comes from Joseph Novak, and he identifies that for students to learn meaningfully, 3 things need to be in play. 1, meaningful content. 2, the assent of the learner. The learner has to choose to learn. And 3, the connection to prior knowledge. Now again, I recognize that I'm not necessarily talking to educators, and especially these first 2 points are not especially relevant to the day-to-day work that you do. But this connection to prior knowledge can be, because if we think about in our reflection what students' prior knowledges are about the technologies that they're using, the ways that they are collaborating in ways that we identify as academic dishonest, but they might not think as academic dishonest, we can get to a better understanding of the things that are driving and motivating students to engage in these practices. I assume that you all know the literature about why and how students engage in these practices, as well as know that there is this sliding scale of students that are always going to, that are always going to engage in activities they know are wrong because that is a morality framework that they might think is okay, to across the scale with students that just don't know, that just don't realize what they are doing is wrong. So we want to get the students in a lot of that spectrum to understand differently academic honesty. And so by talking through it, by reflecting in it, in our community of practice, I just spilled my tea everywhere. Oh, that's kind of fun, spilling the tea. I wish I actually had fun gossip. I don't. I mean, anyway, I definitely don't. But I did just spill the tea. By reflecting, we can get maybe to a closer understanding of prior knowledges that students are bringing in to their learning as a way to talk with our teaching and learning centers, develop our policies, think about our practices in ways that can meet and challenge those prior knowledges that are based in academic dishonest actions. I do just quickly want to talk about the assent of the learner. We don't really have, if you're not an educator, we don't really have a lot of context to help ensure that we are teaching and learning in environments where students feel comfortable in agreeing to learn, to consenting to learn. However, I do just want to encourage you to think about the assent of the learner. The students might not be consenting to learn right now because of their burden that they're going. So this idea of care, this idea of being aware of the factors that that align with students' willingness to engage in learning at all, we should be mindful of. So as a mode of conclusion, how could you develop your own academic HonesTEA? So a community of practice that focuses on reflection in a way to prompt new actions. And the first one is to develop a community of practice. Host a meeting, get people together, have a conversation, get people together as a community of practice. Now, if you want to make this more of an HonesTEA, then we can do some other actions. One thing that we are doing is that we want to rotate hosts who share the topics, practices, and discussion. This ensures that we are not keeping the information or the ideas too central, but that different faculties can now share topics and practices, and we can hear things differently. Everyone has actually been really keen to step up and host, and so I'm looking forward to getting back, because one of the things that's really great is when we have different hosts, we can also see different spaces. And if you're in a large university like York, seeing other people's working spaces is important. And then, again, this is the key to the HonesTEA. I recognize that there is going to be venting in this. I would encourage you to move the conversation away from complaining as much as possible, but venting is an important an important activity that we're engaging in. So after venting, direct conversations to the how and the why in order to identify larger topics, in order to identify those connections to prior knowledge that students might have. And then when you have the how and why, this is a good opportunity to connect with your teaching and learning commons and to develop an action plan. Now, I recognize that not all institutions have the capacity or willingness, if we were going to spill some tea, not our tea, we're wonderful at York, but I recognize that collaboration isn't always just this normal straightforward thing, but you can develop an action plan for yourself in your office. How do you want to streamline the process a little bit more? How do you want to communicate with topics to students when you're talking with them? Your action plan can be very individual as well as institutional. And this is another key element. If you do have large actions you in the HonesTEA want to take, don't have those conversations in the HonesTEA. Strike another working group and just so you know, I don't necessarily advocate for more meetings and working groups, but if you're very action oriented, I think they're very powerful. Strike a working group to identify those large scale group or questions to be addressed, because that way the HonesTEA can be that space for venting and reflection, and people don't feel like, oh, now we have to go and do the work. I really just want to connect with colleagues. Because members of your HonesTEA should, number one, feel like a supported member of the community. That is a key element of what an HonesTEA in our kind of conception should be about. Two, know that this is a place to share and to vent. So again, complaining, bitching, I'm really sorry for that misogynistic colloquialism, is not productive, but venting can be. So know that it is a space that can happen. And have members of your HonesTEA recognize their own potential to make change. Oh, because we talked about this, I'm able to understand that maybe students are coming in with this prior understanding. Therefore, I can shift my communications with faculty in this way. So that action plan can again be something that is individual as well as institutional. So those were the ideas behind the academic HonesTEA. I recognize I went over time a little bit, but I think we still have time for questions. So I'm happy to take any questions that you have.